Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And remember, if you're an author yourself and you want any help with self-publishing, be sure to check out our author services link at the top of this page, because we can help with blurbs and covers and marketing advice and all sorts of other things. But anyway, let's turn our attention to our very special guest, who we are delighted to decided to spend some time chatting to us today. It is Jennifer Musser, who is a global business consultant and author. I hope I pronounced your name right, because I have a mental block. You told me exactly how to pronounce your name and it vacated from my head immediately. How are you doing today, Jennifer?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, well, we're delighted to have you here, because I'm very excited about what you want to talk about, because it is all about the juxtaposition between being an author and being an entrepreneur and how they meld together. So thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thanks, Roland, and thanks, Jennifer. See, my trick is I just say the first names because they're always really easy. So thanks for coming on. Yeah. Like Roland said, authors, we know when you're a self-publisher, you're a business owner. You are wearing all the hats. You do all the jobs, unless you choose to, farm some of them out, hire consultants to, or cover designers or blurb writers, or et cetera, right? But you still do have to think about your self-publishing journey as a business, because you're running a business. You're producing a product. You're putting that product on the market. You're advertising that product. You need people to sell that product. So talking to somebody like yourself who works with business owners all the time to maximize their profits and do things the right way, it makes a lot of sense. And the fact that you're an author yourself, you see things from end to end from that perspective. So why don't you start us off with telling us a bit about yourself and what you do and how you work with the businesses that you work with and what you do for them, and then how you sort of got into writing your book, and then we'll talk about how all those sort of lessons combine.
Great. Okay. So I work with business owners directly, founders, business owners, business leaders, and really it falls into a few main categories: project management, projects that they need to outsource. It could be a project that they've already identified, or they need help identifying what it is that they want to optimize, and then choose the project from there. Your typical profit improvement work, cost reduction, business transformation type stuff I love to do. And small business, I call it small business progression program, where we just start where they are. It's a unique fit to whatever business it is, where they are, where they want to get to over, say, 60, 90 days or longer. And so those are the key areas that I focus with small business owners. So when I started my business working with folks like I just described doing, I knew quickly that I wasn't alone in certain themes, right? Like, how am I supposed to juggle all this? Okay, I came from corporate, I came from consulting for a firm, and now here I am, and I'm doing A to Z myself. And so that is one huge theme. And so when I started down this path of the book, there were themes like that in the back of my mind. Like, I've been feeling certain things. I've been exploring in different ways, figuring stuff out on my own. You don't have a marketing department or a human resources department. And so those are things that you need to do. Those are just two examples that you need to figure out on your own. And so that's a overarching theme of the book. And so the second part of your question about how I got into the book. So when I started the business, it was during COVID. And so we all had extra time, right? So I started journaling. I started an Enlightened Leadership blog on my company website. And I started writing stuff that I didn't even put out there for public consumption. And then fast forward, and that led me to, gee, I really like writing. This is a part of my brain that I haven't used since like high school, probably, maybe college, but that's kind of a stretch because I was a business major. And so I went down this, I describe it as a parallel journey. So here I am with my business. I'm doing this creative, whatever you want to call it, writing on the side with the blog. And some people said to me like, oh, this is good. Oh, I like this. Oh, you should think about this. Put a book of your blogs together, and did people just make all these suggestions. And then the book kind of organically came to me from there, but that was the beginning of the whole journey.
Yeah, that I think for a lot of people that write nonfiction, I think that's a sort of a similar journey. That's going to sound familiar to them, where they work in a space or they're interested in the space and they start doing things that aren't necessarily to do with writing a book, but then they realize that they have all this knowledge. They can pull it all together and they can put something out there that will resonate with people that are interested in that. So, with your background, you're able to, I guess, understand what the, inherently what the successful things are that would go into a book. So when you look at that, how do you start it? Do you start, I guess, do you look at other books that are out there? Do you study all of that to try to figure out, break it down and say, okay, what made this book successful? What can I do to make mine successful in a similar way? How did you approach that?
So that's a great topic. Well, if we roll back to kind of the beginning of it for my writing journey that led to this book, I felt a strong pull, a magnetic something in me to do this book. And it literally came to me, my most recent blog, I kind of talk a little bit about the story behind the story. So, family vacation, I'm walking on the beach, doing my thing like I normally do, yada, yada. And then it kind of came to me. And some creative folks, when I share that story with them, they're like, oh yeah, that happened to me. Or, I've heard it from people that have written different things. And so that is the beginning to me, but I'm raising it here because that was, when you feel called to do something or you feel some sort of passion, fire in you, however you want to describe it, it is pulling you toward it. And so I went with that. To get into the other parts of your question. So yeah, like I said, when we were talking before, so I've been an avid reader. I definitely lean toward nonfiction. And so it's easy to, I say, take for granted. There's so many good books out there, and traditionally published books tend to look really good. And, when you read a book and you're not writing a book, there are things that are just there that you may not think of. When you start to get into writing a book, I've spent hours in Barnes and Nobles and different bookstores because that was part of my research, just looking through books and what kind of books are grouped together, and what they look like, and the covers, and all this stuff. So literally from front cover, spine to back cover, and all of the interior I studied. So that's one thing, like understanding the difference between what a good book looks like and then breaking that down into the components that you need to deal with, because each of those components, I approach it like a project if I was doing this for my clients. So each component became a work stream for me. The cover was a work stream, every little thing. So that's the research part. To keep going, to answer you, the cover is a good thing to talk about. So for nonfiction, I was advised, I read about having covers look like your genre. So that was part of my research. And when I went to bookstores and I looked at where my book would fit in, they were good covers and stuff, but it just didn't feel like me. And so the name of my book is Align Your Business with the Real You. So being true to myself, I knew right there that I had to deviate a little bit because I had a vision. You know, there's pink sky, there's a road with a little bit gravel if you look close, you know, different directions. Like I have a vibe of that cover that is true to me. And I hired a cover designer to do it, and she's amazing. But she executed my vision. So I guess I'll pause there and say, when you're creating your own book, especially when you're self-publishing, you have so much room to make that book like you. You also want it to perform well in the market, but you don't have to make it look like, you know, cover-wise is an example. You don't have to make it look like the books on the rest of the table. You know, it's kind of like how do you show up is kind of how you can make your book show up in a professional way.
I love that. I mean, it's when you think about it, I'm always saying to people, oh, you got to make sure your cover looks like other books in your genre. But at some point, all of the books in the genre have to be trying to look like one particular book. So maybe like being able to, maybe for 90% of people, it's like, no, you should make your books look like everybody else. But for that 1% of people, it's like, no, you should have your book that ends up becoming the book that other people want their book to look like. I mean, your cover actually, I think, looks wonderful. The Align Your Business with the Real You, and you've got that bright, like, a lens flare in the center of it, and that make I'm Craig's gonna know I'm a complete nerd about this, because I literally went through like the top 100 books in a particular genre and counted whether they use sans serif text or not sans serif text, and what colors they use and stuff like that. And you can see it is a numbers game. It's like 80% of books have this kind of font, 70% of books have these kind of covers. And I think you've done a really good job being able to have a book that looks like it belongs on a bookshelf next to other books in that genre, but at the same time standing out, which that's the magic touch you can't really teach.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that. That means a lot. And one thing when I've taken is I've started doing some personal visits with the book to businesses and bookstores, and folks comment on the cover. I mean, obviously it's the first thing people see when you're giving them a book, but there's been consistent commentary about the cover, and that, you know, there's a lesson in that, at least for me, but there could also be for authors out there, because when you think about, and I drew sketches, and I'm not an artist by any means. That's, you know, I leave that to the professionals, but I had to sketch out what my vision was, you know, and the light that you mentioned on the cover, that was very intentional. Like I want an element of light and stuff. So I encourage authors to have fun with the book cover, keep it professional. I mean, you don't want to go too outlandish, but have it represent things that mean something to you and the story within the book. And that's what I strive to do.
Right. I think sometimes people might take some of the cover advice a little bit too literally, or apply it to genres where it's not as key as others. So, you know, often when we talk about the idea that you should, especially for newer authors, that you should study the covers of books in your genre so that yours fits, right? And the reason for that is, you know, you're making this, you're putting this book out there, and readers don't know you, and the first impression they get is your cover. And if your cover fits what they think it should look like for a book of that type, that's sort of that first step of building the trust that they know that your book will probably also do that. When somebody goes and does something that's completely different than their genre, it's a harder sell, because then people look at it and they think, yeah, that's not really the kind of book I read, right? In some genres, especially fiction, nonfiction, that's it's I think easier to take some more chances. I mean, in this kind of book, right? If you look at the other books, I was just looking at some of the other books in your sub genre, and the covers, they're all very much the words, right? There's very little graphics, right? If you look at a romance, it's got a man on it, or it's got a man and a woman, right? It's but with nonfiction, a lot of the times there's very little imagery. So yours is really good, because it's a lot of, it's the words, it's the cover, and that's the main part of it. But you also have that sort of, there is imagery, but it's got that glow, and it's still not really, it still fits within that thing, but like Roland said, it still stands out at the same time. And sometimes when you read that, what you said about make sure your book looks like other covers, some people do take that a little too literally, or they say, well, I don't want my book to look exactly the same. It's not that it has to look exactly the same. It has to give that same feeling, so that readers know, yes, this is the kind of book that I want to read. If your cover looked like a romance cover, that's not going to work, right? So,
right.
Yeah, I think that you did a good job of being a little bit different and adding your own flair, but still fitting. So that's great. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Good. So then, when you're looking at other components, let's say your blurb, I guess you follow the same sort of model where you probably read a bunch of other blurbs, got a feeling for what they said in theirs, and then put your own flair on it.
Yes. So the blurb, I've learned, kind of follows some sort of, I use the word formula, even though it's words, the intro, the you need a hook in there, and what you're going to give the reader as a takeaway. And so I ended up having one on the back cover of the book, and then on the book selling websites like Barnes and Noble, for example, I have a different one that's more, it has the same sort of message, but it's geared more towards somebody that's actually at the buying stage, because they're looking on a bookseller's website. And then, physically what they hold in their hand has a similar but different version. So that's the approach that I ended up taking. The other reason I did it that way is the blurb on the back of the book, it kind of, to me as the author, it kind of got redundant, may not be the right word, but to put that on booksellers' websites, it just felt like it needed a refresh. It needed to be a little bit different. So that's why I chose to do it that way.
I love it. I think that's a very good piece of advice to give. It's like your blurb might appear in various different places, or you might have the opportunity to describe your book in various different places, not just the back cover of your book, but also when you're promoting it here, there. It's always worth massaging whatever copy you have to make it specifically appropriate to that place, because just even small subtle nuances can make it so much more effective.
Yes. And you mentioned a couple of things. Font,
yeah,
font is another thing, like interior design, that when you read books, it looks good, but I never read a book and wondered what font it was. And then when it came time to choosing my font, it's like, oh boy, I mean, there are tons of fonts out there. So that was a whole other thing. So I encourage authors to think about your font, because it matters.
Now you come from kind of like a marketing and business background, because I took so much attention to fonts because I used to work in an advertising agency where I'd look at like 4 different fonts, and
Mhm.
to the naked eye they'd all look identical, but they're like, no, this one is like 2% thinner, and you know this. So it's interesting how you kind of get equipped with that. What's your background in terms of being able to identify these really important differences and things that most people don't turn a blind eye to?
So I have an eagle eye. When it came time to do certain things for this book, my eagle eyes came out. But unlike you, I am not a font expert. I'm not a marketing expert. Historically, I've been finance operations girl. So, there's nuances and details that go into books that you really have to figure out as you go. And I talked about the treating each component of the book as a work stream, pulling it from my project management background and what I do for my work. But there's also I pulled a lot, as a consultant, going back in time. I worked in pharmaceutical industry, medical devices, telecom, all these different things. And I had to be a quick study. That was part of what I did. And so I applied that to this. I quickly became a quick study, and I learned a lot. And so self-publishing, for me, this is my first book. So self-publishing, I feel like at the end of the day, for me, it's been a lot of work. It's been a mountain after mountain, some unexpected. Definitely have to put out fires at times and meet deadlines. And so I've learned so much, and that's been cool, because it's not like somebody did A to Z for me, and maybe in the future that would be a good thing. But I can I understand the interior graphics, the interior design. We talked about the cover, the font, all this stuff, and building my team to accomplish all these things. And then, now I'm at the stage where it's I'm at another mountain, because all the stuff has to be finalized for the launch. You know how that goes. Yeah. And so there's a lot to it that I'd say buckle your seatbelt for, but it's worth it in the end.
I think your approach is one that can work for a lot of people, like the idea of approaching it from a project management standpoint, when, a lot of people, when they look at the A to Z of getting your book from, concept to, published, there's a lot of steps. It can be really overwhelming, and you have to really break it down into the components and do them one step at a time. Maybe there's a few where you have to sort of do them in parallel, or you need to do them in a certain order, but you really do need to break it down. Otherwise, you're going to be overwhelmed. There's a lot of authors that we worked with recently, even where, they're trying to do everything all at once. And when you do that, you can never really focus on one thing at a time enough to do it well. You have to be able to say, okay, this is the priority right now, and then this is going to be the priority. I'm going to focus, because you can't do everything all at once, especially if you're not hiring out. You can do things in parallel by hiring a cover designer, hiring a proofwriter, hiring a formatter, hiring it. You still have to have all those pieces in place when they're needed. But when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of money to put into it, which is the case for a lot of authors, they're trying to do as many things as they can on their own. And you have to be able to compartmentalize and turn these things into like little components and work on them, and think about them individually. Otherwise, you're just going to get bogged down by the tremendous amount of details and things that you have to do.
Actually, Jennifer, you were saying something similar to that, with like you almost like project managed it, which I think is what kind of, Craig, you're saying. It's like you have this big project, so you have to project manage each element to it, which isn't necessarily something that comes naturally to a writer, right? It's like, I want to write my book, and then it's like, okay, you've written your book, now you have to put on an entirely different hat and be like a project manager and then a marketer and then a publisher.
I love what you just said about putting on the different hat. Well, I love elements of what you both just said. So yes, putting on a different hat, because that's really what it comes down to. And we're not experts in every single thing. So there are days when, okay, today I'm in my business. Like I have to work on my business today. And today I have to deal with this marketing stuff. So you are wearing different hats. And then the other comment I loved about emphasizing breaking it down into components. So there's been times, you know, this is not all like pink flowers and rainbows when you're doing this kind of work. So I've had my own, you know, decision points when it's like, okay, I have to decide which direction I'm going here, or I have to decide, you know, when I'm going to commit to get whatever it is done, whatever it is. But trying to think of the year, December of 2023, I was at a decision point for certain things. And that's when I ended up kind of solidifying, I think I need to go the self-publishing route, because I didn't start that way. But I had to understand what that meant in terms of, okay, well, if I do that, well, what does that even mean? And what do I have to do? So I literally one night came into my office in my home, and I did what I did at work and what I do for clients now. And I got those, I have those sticky, like the big Post-it, you know, the things you stick on the wall. And I got out my colored Sharpies and I created work streams. Like, okay, this is how Jennifer's going to get this done. And I needed to see it. Like I needed to see it on a wall and figure it out. And from there, that's kind of, that solidified for me two things. One, in my gut at that moment, I knew self-publishing was going to be the right direction for me. And then I also knew it was going to be a really heavy lift. And there were, you know, this big Post-it page of color-coded work streams that I had to deal with. But that I encourage authors to take the time. And then I enjoyed Christmas. I was like, okay, I'm just putting this away. That was before Christmas.
Yep.
I'll deal with this in January and figure it out. And I had to, you know, I had other things to do with the book itself. And then what that decision actually entailed and how I would go from there. But I needed to take that step back, give myself a visual, kind of absorb what it would mean, and then just step away and take a break and enjoy life and then come back to it in January, which is what I did.
I think that's really, really good advice for all authors, because I often find myself, it's like 6 o'clock in the evening. I'm like, oh, I still need to be doing this, still need to be doing that. It's like, no, sometimes you just need to switch off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of authors are familiar with that idea of, you know, the Post-it notes, but I think a lot of them will do it when planning out their story, right? So they'll have all the, you know, elements of the story, the characters, and they can move things around. But I think what what you're talking about too is you can do it for the grand scheme of publishing. You know, you have all the different steps that you have to go through to get that book. Even if the book's, you know, finished, there's still like written, there's still a bunch of things that you have to do, and in order you have to do them. And you know, so having that visually laid out can sometimes give you a good idea, keep you from getting overwhelmed, allow you to break it down into tasks even easier, because each one is maybe a Post-it note, right? You can take that and then that maybe that satisfaction of pulling them off when you're done, if that's how you do it, right? Sometimes
rip up a few.
Yeah, you know, maybe be like, all right, I finished that one.
Yeah. And celebrate. I mean, to that point, there have been times when it's like, okay, let's go out to dinner tonight because I got XYZ done. Like I'm on cloud 9 right now. You know, so all the little steps, celebrate that for yourself.
Yeah, you celebrate the individual steps, not just wait till the end
Right.
celebrate, right? Take that Post-it note off the wall, rip it into tiny pieces, and now throw it up in the air like confetti, right? And then how did you approach the actual writing of the book? Was it a similar process? Because you hadn't written one before. Did you break that all down into different components? I know you had the blog to pull from, but I assume, the book isn't just a series of blog articles. You probably massaged it into a different format, right? So how did that work?
So that's a whole other thing. So great question. This will help a lot of authors too. So I'll share a bit about my timeline. So my beach walk decision, calling, magnetic pull, all that good stuff happened August 2022. So the commitment I made in my mind was by Christmas. Can you tell I attach things to year-end holidays? So by Christmas, I wanted to have a solidified plan of how I was going to start writing this thing for real. And so my thing from the beginning was professionalism, but my voice. So for me personally, and this is going back a couple years before AI is what it is now, but it was churning back then, AI. I didn't want AI to use it for me, and no ghostwriting for me. So I think those are fine. But for me, it was important because of the approach of this book is this whole, it's a conversational business approach, is the feel of my book. So I had the kind of the feel of the book, the objectives of the book, a rough outline of the book, like in my mind. And then I started talking to editors because it was my first book and I knew kind of what I didn't know. And now I know a lot more about what I didn't know. And so I did hire an editor to help me. So that was part of the process for me. In terms of how I wrote it, she was great about asking me some questions like, do you have time for that? How are you going to make time for this? That was like our first meeting when we really got going. And I'm an all-in kind of person. So for me, I don't procrastinate and stuff like that. So everybody's different. But for me, I wasn't worried about that. But when I found time to write, you both know from writing and creative stuff, there's two things. Like one, you got to make the time for it at a time that works for your brain. And then there's the other of when you're in this creative mode, like stuff just downloads. So I literally had Post-its, like I'm a Post-it girl, but I literally had Post-its all over the house. They weren't just in my office. They were like everywhere, in my car, in my purse, on my mirror, like everywhere, because I would get these ideas like sentences, phrases, whatever. I would send myself text messages. It was just this whole thing. It kind of still is. So that's one, like just let your brain download and just be prepared, like have paper with you, text yourself, whatever you got to do, because I've learned that if I'm working out and I get like some sort of idea, if I don't write it down, it's gone. Like it just, I don't necessarily absorb it. I've heard other people say that. And then for me, I love the early morning. So I literally would wake up at 4 a.m. and I would have my coffee. I would make two, and I'd go, two big ones, and I'd go write. I would do like part of my morning routine, then I'd write, then I'd do what I have to do for the family. And then so I had to break up my day like that, because for me, and everybody's different, but for me, I can't write when there's a lot going on around me, or when I know like, okay, I have 15 minutes, but then I have to go do whatever. Like if I know I need to really get into something, I won't start until I have a bigger block of time. If it's just an idea, like I downloaded a couple sentences from my mind, that's different. So I guess in a nutshell, as a writer, just figure out what works for you. And one is be prepared to get those downloads, and don't assume you're going to remember it. Just get it on paper or get it somewhere where you have it later, because that is like really good material. Some of my really good stuff came at like the oddest times, like, well, not odd, but walking the dogs, or, you know, in the shower or exercise, you know, like just random times. And then the other is find out what works for you. And if you, I said I'm not a procrastinator, and if people are procrastinators, then just figure out what writing means for you then. Like, are you going to have to block out the last day that you want to finish your chapter? Like, I don't know, but figure out what works for each personality, because everybody's so different.
Nothing has resonated with me as much as what you said about the whole writing experience. People don't get that if they're not writers. It's like, you know, they're like, oh, why don't you just stay up till midnight to do it? It's like, my brain is fried then. We've got 15 minutes you could write now. And it's like, that's not going to work for me. Do you not understand? But yeah, so I appreciated you validating my experience as a writer.
And Roland's used a lot of those same analogies in the past, the downloading of these ideas.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very similar, and I have this exact same thing where if I don't write it down when it comes to me, and it always comes to me at odd times, shower, like you said, often when I'm lying in bed, I don't sleep that well because things are spinning. And if things are spinning, they will continue to spin until I get them out. So I won't be able to fall asleep unless I write it down. So I'll send myself a text, or I'll write it on my phone or whatever. And as soon as I can do that, it's because I know I have no chance of forgetting it now. But the reason it spins is like I think I'm worried that I'm going to forget it. So I'm like, it's just going through my head like over and over and over again. So I got to get it out. And when I get it out, then I can relax. But so yeah, I think that those are things that, you know, they work for some people, you and I, maybe other people, it's a little different thing, but you're right. Everyone has to figure out their own process. But it's always going to be step by step. And it's just figuring out when those steps work for you and what those steps look like.
And back to the download thing, what I learned is the creative outlet, once, and some authors who haven't fully immersed themselves in that, they'll feel it when it comes. Like, that was very cool to me, to looking back, like all those downloads resulted in a book, you know. So it's really cool, and it's one of those streams that you turn it on and then you can't turn it off. Like, my book is done, it's written now, but I'm still getting, I don't know, some sort of the creative part of my brain is not off because the book is done.
Absolutely. I love when you get into like that flow state, there's nothing like it at all. And I think they even say that all 5 of the chemicals or something that make you happy, like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin, that's the only time all 5 are released at the same time. So it can be such an amazing experience. But yeah, the best writing I've ever done has actually been when I'm not writing. I'm doing the washing up and I'm thinking of things and percolating them. You're right, it never switches off. It's like running a program in the background of your head, like processing all the time while you're doing other stuff.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
I think when you don't have that pressure of sitting in front of the computer or the notepad to say, okay, now write. You know, it's like your brain relaxes in those other things, those other times. People say there's this saying about how if you have a problem, you think about it before you go to sleep, and when you wake up, you'll have the answer, kind of thing, right? It's the same sort of thing. It's because you've let your brain relax, do it at its own pace, at its own time. And for writers, a lot of that means, you know, while your brain's turned off doing other things, that's when it starts spinning, and you can't force it. You can't be like, oh, now is my 15 minutes of writing time, so I have to write. It doesn't work that way for most people.
Right.
So and then how are you going to market it. Like, I mean, this is a business book, and you have a business working with small businesses. So you do have that natural sort of almost built-in audience. But, I'm sure given what we've discussed so far and who you are, you probably have a plan for marketing it as well.
I do and I don't. And here's why I say both ways. So organically, the book is already fitting with certain groups of people that I'm part of. So, for example, I have, through one of my contacts, she's part of a book club. And so they already have the book. I gave them advance read. So she approached me about talking to the book club. So I got them advanced reader copies. I'm talking to them in March. And then there's another group I'm also part of. And once they heard about it, same thing. I got an email like, will you talk to us about, pick a chapter and walk us through it type thing. So I'm getting stuff like that more and more now. So that was part of my vision, just let it naturally unfold. Some other stuff I'm doing is marketing related through different organizations. So, for example, I'd encourage authors, if you're self-publishing, to become part of, or at least explore, check out different organizations. So IBPA is a good one that has different offerings, even some of the review avenues. So that's probably helpful to talk about, actually. So part of my marketing plan was to get reviews early in the process. So the end of this past year, I started sending advanced reader copies out, and some of the reviews have been really good. In fact, today I'm on the Publishers Weekly Book Life editor's pick for this week's issue. The book is in there. And so that's kind of opened up some doors too, because I've made a couple of friends over there, and then they have some marketing offerings. So I'd say an important part of the marketing that is useful when you're self-publishing is when you're comfortable with the version of the advanced reader copy. Get to a point where you're comfortable with that you could send it out and get some early reviews so that you get feedback. So for me, some of the feedback has really validated what it is I'm trying to deliver to the readers with this book. And that's a really good, collection of data, I guess is the right word when you're dealing with a book. Like, what reviewers are saying about it is a good, you want a good sampling. So I tried to get probably 12 of those I'll have by the end of this month, and the book comes out. The book isn't even out yet. So that's a big part of my marketing plan. At this point, I don't have, some folks will say you need to have PR, and I do think there's value in that. And I am going to explore it again, but I knew that for me, getting involved with that, one, I didn't have the bandwidth to kind of explore that until I still don't right now. But at some point, that's worth exploring. And some of the marketing, there's so many marketing services out there, and it's easy to get kind of distracted and pulled in. So my advice is explore what you feel kind of resonates with you, because there's a lot of good stuff out there, but then there's not so much good stuff out there, and especially for first-time authors. I get a lot of emails like, oh, I saw you on Publishers Weekly and we do yada yada, and so you just have to be selective.
I think we've said that a lot of times. There are, you know, Craig and I got together because we wanted to try and provide value to people, to authors when we work with them. But there are an awful lot of people out there selling kind of like snake oil. So that was very, very good advice. Now, unfortunately, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so we have to cut things short. That was kind of a good point to end things on, though. But Jennifer, how wonderful all the things you've shared with us. Thank you so much. Before I ask you to tell us all about where people can come and find out more about you, Craig, do you have any final questions?
No, I think, like you said, I think that that's a good point to end on, because it's like, you know, marketing is one of those last steps that you do. And like everything else, you know, you have to take it step by step, and you have to evaluate what is right for you. There's tons of options out there, and even discounting the scams and the bad ones. There's a lot of good options out there, but you can't do them all, right? And especially when you're first starting, and especially because marketing is there's generally a cost involved. You don't want to outlay all of your money up front before you determine whether the book is doing well. You know, you want to sort of roll your profits in and keep it going, as opposed to, you know, burning it all and then finding out there was some issue. But so it sounds like you're doing all the things right, and you've figured it out. And it's like, you know, this step-by-step, you know, project managing approach to putting out a book, it would really work for a lot of people. So thanks for coming on and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Now, where can everyone find out more about you, your book that hasn't been released yet, but we can go and see the beautiful cover right now? Where can people go and find out more about Jennifer?
So the website for my business has a page for the book. So that's the best place right now, jlmaconsulting.com. And you could also, if you want to check out Barnes & Noble, the book is titled Align Your Business with the Real You.
Fantastic. Well, we will put a link down in the description so you can go and check out Jennifer's book. So I definitely advise you to do that. While you're scrolling down there, you'll see that big empty comment section. Make sure to leave Jennifer a comment and let her know how much you've appreciated everything that she has shared with us today. And also hit that like button, that subscribe button, and there's a little bell icon there you can tap to get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a brand new episode of Fully Booked coming out next week. So until then, cheerio.